Be me, Nolan, 31, senior back-end engineer at a medium-sized industrial software company. Not glamorous enough for headlines, not stable enough for comfort, just that profitable anonymous middle. We build scheduling platforms for packaging plants, freight depots, and warehouses. Nobody photographs voluntarily. Nobody at parties asks follow-up questions when I explain what our platform actually does. That never bothered me, because boring software usually means renewals, margins, and relatively calm Tuesdays. I'd been there 4 years, 8 months, and 11 production scares, which felt like seniority. My role was simple in theory, harder in practice, and mostly invisible when done correctly. Write dependable services, review risky database changes, answer technical questions, and prevent expensive surprises. The office rhythm was familiar corporate weather, mildly irritating but predictable enough to navigate blindfolded. Sales chased miracles, product chased deadlines, infrastructure chased outages, finance chased reasons, budgets drifted. Engineering mostly chased clarity because every other department translated urgency into slightly different dialects. Still, arguments usually ended with decisions, even messy ones, and work eventually moved forward. Our previous HR director practically lived inside payroll spreadsheets and annual enrollment reminder emails. She never entered roadmap discussions, client calls, incident channels, or anything involving operational judgment. Then she retired quietly, got 1 cake, 2 speeches, and disappeared into well-deserved obscurity. 3 months later, leadership announced her replacement during all hands with suspiciously polished enthusiasm. Her name was Vanessa, 36 maybe, elegant posture, perfect diction, and conference keynote energy. She smiled like someone permanently aware of her own camera angle and brand narrative. First week she posted about trust, belonging, and making every room safer for underheard voices. Second week she launched pulse surveys asking whether meetings felt balanced, respectful, and structurally welcoming. Third week she scheduled listening sessions and asked how power operated within engineering conversations. I told her on my turn that pager duty was our most honest expression of power. Vanessa wasn't cartoonishly mean, which honestly made everything worse once the trouble really started. She sounded sincere, patient, and deeply convinced invisible damage surrounded ordinary work like radiation. She could convert small hallway complaints into initiatives before lunch and workshops before Friday. Then Monday morning at 9:12, her email landed, and the floor temperature changed. Subject line said conversational equity protocols effective immediately, and somehow looked smug and bold. The message opened warmly enough, thanking everyone for building culture through openness and shared accountability. Second paragraph shifted into policy language, dense enough to require coffee and emotional insulation. Therefore, temporary balancing measures would apply to male employees across recurring collaborative forums immediately. Rule 1 limited men to 2 substantive interventions per meeting, unless directly invited further. Questions counted as interventions, clarifications counted, context counted, and summaries definitely counted too during meetings. Rule 2 required a 4-second reflective pause after any woman spoke, including direct questions. Rule 3 prohibited anticipatory technical explanation without explicit request from the original speaker in meetings. Rule 4 discouraged immediate solution offering when women described problems or surfaced process concerns. Rule 5 required amplification language before introducing new information that might recenter male perspectives. Rule 6 instructed facilitators to monitor tonal sharpness whenever men corrected female colleagues publicly. The message concluded with a pilot scorecard tracking speaking ratios in recurring meetings for leadership. I read everything twice beside the coffee machine because disbelief needed confirmation and caffeine. Gabe from Data Infrastructure leaned over my shoulder and quietly said, "Temporary usually means forever." Marcus from front end wandered in, heard the summary, and asked whether stand-ups now needed referees. None of us laughed because sometimes absurdity arrives too polished to feel like comedy. Our product manager, Lila, passed by and muttered, "We'll adapt with exhausted middle management resignation." At lunch, 6 of us sat outside pretending salads counted as morale restoration and problem solving. Gabe asked the question first. What happens if we follow every instruction exactly as written? Marcus brightened immediately because malicious compliance is just engineering with theatrical timing and witnesses. Owen from Infra said they cannot punish obedience without admitting the policy itself is broken. I said then we obey precisely, document everything, and let consequences walk in uninvited. Ray from Product Operations said Weird was already here and probably making a spreadsheet. Wednesday training arrived with pastel slides, calm music, and Vanessa centered beneath the company logo. She framed normal technical habits as dominance reflexes inherited from systems nobody had consciously designed. Answering quickly, she explained, could crowd out slower voices and reinforce invisible hierarchy loops. One slide literally listed common male reflexes beside watercolor icons and breathing prompts between sections. Another introduced the conversational tracker, a spreadsheet recording interventions, airtime, and support language frequency. Cells turned amber for caution and red when a man exceeded approved participation thresholds. Facilitators, usually women project managers, would gently uphold norms to keep rooms relationally safe. We signed acknowledgement forms because rent exists, principals don't lower utility bills, and mortgages hate courage. That night, Gabe created a private group chat named 4 Seconds and added 7 people. First message said obey everything, save screenshots, and never improvise beyond the written language. Marcus replied with a stopwatch emoji and said he was buying poker chips tomorrow. Owen wrote raise hands in meetings so no facilitator could accuse us of interruption. I added stop after 2 interventions, even if the room catches fire metaphorically or literally. Gabe answered, then clients can ask leadership why answers suddenly sound like hostage transcripts. Monday sprint planning became our first field test, and Vanessa joined as silent observer. Lila opened priorities, deadlines, and dependencies with her usual brisk efficiency and visible sleep deprivation. Then silence arrived. Not rebellious silence, but careful contractual silence wearing office casual clothes. Marcus placed 2 blue poker chips beside his notebook, like a suburban war ritual. Lila noticed, frowned, and called on him after 20 painful seconds of professionally managed emptiness. Marcus raised 1 chip and said, I want to amplify Lila's concern about bug debt. Then he stopped talking completely and slid the chip aside with ceremonial reverence for everyone watching. Nothing came, just Marcus blinking respectfully like a student who'd completed the assignment exactly. Gabe raised his hand next because unprompted speech now felt legally adjacent and spiritually hazardous. After the required pause, he said, I agree with Marcus, and used his first chip. Lila turned toward me and asked about database migration risk for the warehouse release. I counted 4 full seconds because my body already feared violations more than awkwardness. Migration risk exists, I said, then stopped because anticipatory explanation was now professionally suspicious. Lila stared and asked how severe, which thankfully qualified as an explicit request for detail. Moderate to high, I said, depending on load, rollback timing, and reconciliation tolerance limits. That cost me both interventions because apparently 1 sentence can contain too much useful structure. For the remaining 30 minutes, I sat silently while wrong assumptions bloomed like algae. Meeting ran long, ended unresolved, and generated a follow-up calendar invite before lunch. Week 1 felt mostly awkward, almost funny, like theater performed by people trapped inside compliance manuals. The men started treating meetings like icy staircases where one careless step meant paperwork. Brainstorming evaporated first because speculative context now counted as dominance adjacent, explanatory expansion in meetings. Stand-ups became narrow recitations of status without interpretation, uncertainty, or volunteered risk assessment for managers. Slack filled with careful follow-up messages, beginning as discussed and ending with vague politeness. Email threads grew tentacles because nobody wanted ownership attached to spoken misunderstandings anymore all week. Week 2, product scoping should have taken 40 minutes and instead consumed 94. Lila and Elena from design debated approaches while repeatedly talking over each other without consequences. Nobody intervened because correcting either woman publicly now risked tonal framing and escalation notes. Eventually, Lila pointed directly at me and asked which option was technically safer for rollout. I waited 4 seconds so visibly that Elena glanced at the ceiling in disbelief. Both can work, I said, which was accurate, useless, and safely within current policy constraints. Safer for launch, Lila pressed, already sounding like someone regretting every career choice consciously. Depends on traffic shape, rollback tooling, and whether procurement finally approves the queue upgrade. Can you elaborate? She asked through clenched patience and very expensive adult professionalism today. With your permission? Yes, I said, because permission had become mandatory theater before competence. Vanessa nodded approvingly, like she'd just watched rehabilitation succeed inside a nature documentary in captivity. We still ended without a decision and scheduled another meeting to revisit clarifying questions. Design review later that week made everything even stupider in fresh and decorative ways. Elena asked whether one workflow screen could lose a confirmation step users always ignored. I knew the exact technical dependency preventing that simplification, and also knew Rule 3 existed. So I said it might be possible, which was true in the broadest, useless philosophical sense. What would it require, Elena asked, clearly expecting normal speech from a previously normal adult. A structural change, I said, then stopped before accidentally helping the company or the meeting. She laughed because she thought sarcasm had entered, then realized compliance had replaced sarcasm entirely. Afterward, Elena cornered me near the kitchen and asked whether I was doing this deliberately. I waited 4 seconds from pure reflex and said, I'm trying to stay within policy. She stared hard enough to qualify as an OSHA event and walked away muttering litigation-adjacent adjectives. By the second Friday, clients had started noticing our answers felt oddly hollow and delayed. I asked why, and he said your response sounded like a horoscope written by legal. Apparently saying that depends. We can explore, and happy to follow up inspires zero confidence. Vanessa posted a cheerful Slack update celebrating stronger speaking balance across the organization already. Finance did notice something, though, because cycle time reports began bending the wrong direction. Our CFO, Miriam, replied asking whether throughput metrics also showed meaningful improvement alongside ratios. Vanessa answered, culture creates sustainable outcomes, and speed without safety merely reproduces extractive habits. Gabe started routing every decision request into email threads with Vanessa copied for transparency. To preserve respectful communication, he wrote, please confirm the selected option and responsible owner. Vanessa loved documentation in theory and therefore accidentally encouraged bureaucratic strangulation in practice across teams. Suddenly, minor questions needed written approval because spoken answers carried too much interpretive danger. Nobody wanted ownership because ownership means blame. Blame means scrutiny, and scrutiny now included tone. Vanessa sensed participation falling and scheduled a clarity forum to address implementation hesitations compassionately. Gabe asked how many interventions counted as healthy in a 90-minute problem-solving meeting. Marcus asked for an example script showing compliant ways to challenge incorrect assumptions without escalation. Vanessa smiled tightly and delivered the worst phrase imaginable to any engineer on Earth. "Please use common sense," she said, as though policy ambiguity were a spiritual growth opportunity. Gabe answered, "Common sense varies dramatically when disciplinary risk and public trackers are involved." Vanessa repeated that practice builds comfort and written over specification can invite defensive loopholing. Translation, no clarification, all liability, and vibes instead of operational definitions for anyone involved. Week 3 introduced support statements because apparently silence alone wasn't proving enough reflective engagement. Men were encouraged to say thank you for naming that before adding any substantive response. Lila asked for input on release sequencing and received 3 men saying variations of gratitude. Then silence again while she pinched the bridge of her nose into a survival shape. By then, even women who initially liked the framework were getting visibly angry during planning, because somebody still had to fill the empty air and own the accumulating decisions. Lila started over preparing every agenda because live problem solving had become slower than archaeology. 2 female managers snapped at each other during a roadmap review, and neither appreciated being centered afterward. They forwarded the note to each other and stopped speaking for almost an entire day. The pettiness was ordinary, the exhaustion cumulative, and the slowdown starting to smell financial. Then a production incident handed the whole experiment a match and several gallons of accelerant. A customer dashboard began showing duplicate inventory movements for one of our largest accounts. Normally we'd jump on a call, identify the corrupted pipeline, assign owners, and patch quickly. Vanessa insisted incident calls still follow conversational equity guidelines because stress magnifies harmful defaults. Owen began outlining the suspected cause when Dana from implementation interrupted with a timing question. He stopped instantly because her question triggered the 4-second pause and reset his rhythm. Vanessa gently reminded everyone to hold space and avoid urgency, eclipsing inclusive process commitments. Owen, seeing her taking notes, went fully minimal and answered only direct, literal prompts. Every explanation fragmented into tiny pieces, requiring multiple invitations and precious human patience under pressure. The incident that normally takes 40 minutes lasted nearly 2 hours and 11 emails. Sales noticed because the client noticed and asked why competent adults suddenly sounded sedated. Lila said imbalance was not the problem, which landed like a shoe tossed into church. Vanessa smiled professionally and said impact matters beyond intent, especially during high-pressure systems work. Week 4. Vanessa formalized the whole regime with a public channel called Conversational Balance. Every Friday, she posted the tracker, highlighting progress and flagging men approaching unhealthy participation zones. She added voice checkouts during the final minutes of meetings to rate felt balance. Men were instructed to speak last during reflections to avoid dominating interpretation of shared experience. So we all learned one safe closing sentence and repeated it like office monks. I appreciate everyone's contributions and want to remain mindful of the space I occupy. Lila looked like someone being buried under soft blankets and told gratitude counts as oxygen. The women got overloaded because meetings still required answers and men had been trained into furniture. Elena started snapping at developers because every clarification now arrived late, partial, and overly formal. Gabe pushed his resume to updated because the job was starting to feel spiritually radioactive. Then the calendar invite appeared for our quarterly review with Redwood Freight Systems that Monday morning. Redwood represented roughly a fifth of annual revenue and most of leadership's remaining confidence. Grant, the CEO, added critical to the title, which is executive punctuation for possible disaster. Nobody fought her because energy had become our scarcest resource after clarity and trust. Sales wanted commitments, product wanted scope, engineering wanted actual decisions, and Vanessa wanted better ratios. Redwood emailed 3 separate times asking direct technical questions about the delayed inventory module. On the morning itself, their COO, CTO, and procurement lead joined 5 minutes early. Our side included Grant, Miriam, Lila, me, Gabe, Elena, Nick, and unfortunately Vanessa from finance. Vanessa opened with remarks about sustainable collaboration and inclusive partnership before anyone asked for culture. Then the CTO asked whether we could deliver real-time reconciliation by quarter end this quarter. Everyone looked at Gabe and me because reality still lived in engineering no matter policy. I counted 4 seconds on camera because reflex had become stronger than embarrassment or reason. We can, I said, with scoped delivery and dependencies confirmed against the current integration surface. The CTO asked what scope exactly, which was a completely reasonable question for adults. Core ingestion, reconciliation exceptions, and staged reporting, I said, already spending too much informational currency. Edge cases, he asked, leaning forward the way buyers do before deciding someone lacks ballast. To be defined with product, I answered, then stopped because intervention limits turned thought into rationing. Procurement asked defined by when, and suddenly everyone on our side studied their screens intensely. Lila opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at Grant like he might overrule physics. Vanessa jumped in to discuss shared ownership and collaborative decision ecosystems under evolving delivery realities. The CTO cut her off and said, "I'm asking about dates, not emotional governance frameworks." Their procurement lead asked the simplest lethal question of the entire miserable quarter for everybody present. Who here can commit to an actual date without following up in writing later? Silence answered first, not dramatic silence, but bureaucratic silence trained through 6 careful weeks. Grant finally said, "Nolan, please walk them through the plan with visible strain beneath civility." I did what my body had learned because conditioning beats intention when enough risk accumulates. "We have a phased approach," I said, which sounded spineless even to my own ears. "What phases?" the CTO asked, now fully certain he was buying from frightened interns. Phase 1. Ingestion, Phase 2. Exception handling, Phase 3. Expanded visibility and controls refinement. "When do those phases complete?" he asked, continuing the radical experiment called direct communication. Subject to final dependency alignment, we'll provide dates in writing after internal confirmation from us. Their COO exhaled like a man watching a boat drift away without anyone touching oars. Vanessa said we're practicing reflective pauses to support thoughtful, accountable responses under complexity during uncertainty. The CTO said flatly, "This is a vendor review, not a mindfulness residency for meditation." Then he delivered the kill shot with almost casual Midwestern politeness and devastating precision. "If your engineers can't answer directly, we cannot trust your delivery forecast or controls." Procurement said they needed to reassess vendor risk and ended the call 11 minutes early. Grant kept smiling until cameras switched off, then went winter quiet in the conference room. Grant said Redwood was pausing renewal pending a confidence review and immediate corrective planning. He emphasized speed, clarity, accountability, and speaking plainly with clients during critical discussions everywhere. Vanessa responded in chat that culture was never the problem, only stress revealing old habits. Leadership tried to issue 2 contradictory orders simultaneously and pretended nobody noticed the geometry. Move faster, communicate normally, honor the framework, avoid harm, and definitely improve delivery confidence. The company obeyed all directions at once and therefore achieved none of them well. First came a hiring freeze, then expense scrutiny, then whispers containing phrases like operating discipline. 2 weeks later, 15% of staff disappeared through calendar invites and prepared empathy statements. Vanessa coordinated communications and reminded managers to leave 4 seconds before answering emotional reactions. Watching friends get laid off inside ritual pauses felt obscene in a uniquely corporate register. The word temporary quietly vanished from Vanessa's language while every behavioral expectation remained intact. Admitting failure would require admitting causation, and causation was exactly what she professionally dissolved. Projects stalled harder because nobody wanted to preemptively explain missing dependencies or hidden constraints. Bugs lingered because solutions had to be invited, and invitations arrived after incident windows closed. Elena quit first, then Lila quietly started interviewing during dentist appointments and lunch walks. Gabe got an offer across town and left with zero ceremony beyond returned equipment. Nick began asking openly whether client calls could temporarily ignore the framework for revenue preservation. Vanessa told him urgency often disguises dominance, and asked him to examine that impulse carefully. 3 days later, Nick updated LinkedIn and began taking private calls in the parking garage. I left after Miriam privately told engineering to document blockers in excruciating detail for finance. A competitor offered identical pay, fewer workshops, and an incident process still based on reality. I gave 2 weeks' notice and got scheduled for an exit conversation with Vanessa herself. She asked whether I'd felt heard during my time and wrote notes with perfect posture. I said the work used to speak clearly until everyone became afraid of sounding too clear. When she asked about the framework, I said it changed how people answered basic questions. Vanessa smiled gently and called that increased mindfulness around conversational impact under institutional pressure. In that moment, I realized she truly believed the damage was actually evidence of progress. That conviction disturbed me more than the policies because sincerity rarely notices the bodies underneath. 2 months after I left, Owen texted asking whether I was sitting down first. He forwarded an all-hands invite titled Organizational Update and Business Continuity Path Forward. Those words always mean funeral dressed in neutral branding and calendar etiquette and layoffs. Owen called immediately and said, Redwood didn't just pause, they fully terminated the contract. Once Redwood walked, 2 smaller clients followed because confidence problems spread faster than invoices. Grant tried raising bridge money, but investors asked why decision cycles had nearly doubled. They also asked why customers complained about evasive answers and whether legal had reviewed the framework. Apparently legal had not, because Vanessa rolled everything out through culture language and pilot disclaimers. Investors did not care about speaking ratios, emotional safety language, or beautifully improving participation bars. They cared about cash, execution, and whether adults inside the company could answer direct questions. The company didn't explode dramatically, just shrank inward like roots drying under poisoned irrigation. Another layoff wave came, then another. Then office lease negotiations quietly stopped mattering for anyone. Remote first became strategic flexibility, then strategic flexibility became restructuring, then restructuring became cheap acquisition. Our product was absorbed into a larger vendor and our company name vanished within weeks. I asked Owen what happened to Vanessa because part of me needed the final paragraph. Said she stayed until the end, still posting tracker updates to an audience evaporating daily. During the final week, with maybe 13 people left, she emailed about solution delay etiquette. The meeting concerned payroll timing after acquisition, which somehow still inspired her behavioral reminders. Grant finally told her stop in a tone so flat it sounded medically dangerous. Owen said she looked genuinely wounded, not performatively upset, but betrayed by reality itself. Then she helped run the final separation meeting and thanked everyone for their care. She survived until acquisition closed, then got severance and immediate professional invisibility almost immediately afterward. Nobody publicly shamed her because industries stay polite while gossip handles the actual sentencing. rolled out sex-specific participation rules without legal review, tanked renewal, and froze decision pipelines. A few months later, Marcus saw her at a co-working space across the river. No slogans, no keynote clothes, just tired eyes and a laptop covered in nothing. She asked whether his new company was hiring anyone in people operations or cultural strategy. Marcus said their recruiter had already heard enough to become mysteriously unavailable very quickly. Later, Owen sent me the strangest artifact from the whole cursed chapter last winter. An automated reminder email, scheduled months earlier, triggered from our dead domain's system account. Subject line read reflective pause guidance for high-stakes conversations and contained 3 bullet points. The company no longer existed. The sender address bounced, but the forwarded copy still arrived. I stared at that ghost email longer than I should have on a Thursday night. It felt like hearing a fire alarm from a building already demolished and sold for parts. We simply obeyed, documented, paused, and watched a functioning business bleed out politely in real time. I stopped asking why certain companies fail and started asking who gets to define normal speech.